Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today as we discuss how you can better look after yourself and strategy. My name is Paul Williamson, and I'll be chairing this event this afternoon. Having served the property insurance supply chain for over 20 years, I know only too well that you're all used to juggling a million priorities every day. In fact, some would say you thrive on it, but it is taking its toll, and with little or no time to invest in your own well-being or in a strategy, everybody's facing the real prospect of burnout that will see us come out of the other side of COVID in pretty poor shape. And that's why we're running today's session. I'm pleased to be joined by three true thought leaders. Later, we will hear from Kate Russell, who's the MD of CREQ, and Ian Sutcliffe, who's the director and co-founder of Relentless Advisory. But first, I'd like to introduce Lee Mears, partner and executive coach at the Preston Associates and co-founder of TECA, specialist in employee wellbeing. Probably best known as a professional rugby player, Lee played 268 times for Bath over 16 seasons, won 43 caps for his country, played in 2 World Cups, and achieved the pinnacle of any rugby player's career by appearing as a British and Irish Lion. Having faced the might of New Zealand, Australia, and South Africa, maybe not so much Australia, on their home turf, he knows a thing or two about physical and emotional pressure. Lee, welcome. Over to you.
Hi, Paul. Thank you very much for having me today. Obviously, for everybody out there, thank you for signing up and coming along. It means a lot. And already you're ticking one of my boxes around sort of personal health and well-being, and that's that ability to learn. So we're going to talk a few bits today, but for those of you that don't know me, I will share a couple of slides. As a rugby player, I'm not amazing at slide sharing, but we will give it a go. And I love being on screen because you can basically see that I'm quite tall behind the screen, but actually in real life, I'm not that tall at all. So yeah, I'll share those slides in a minute if I need them. But initially, I just wanted to talk about sort of stress and resilience. And people ask me a lot about this. Obviously, coming from a rugby playing environment, people sort of say, oh, are you used to being stressed? Are you used to being stressed? And stress is always a production. If you go into the science, it's a production of the chemicals that are produced by your brain. And I like to talk a lot about stress and pressure. And I really prefer to talk about stress is there to keep you alive. And so as a rugby player, we used to go to the military, the SBS, the SAS, right the way down to the Royal Marines to try and put ourselves under even more stress. And eventually, one of the years, we converted it into pressure, because performance for me is all about dealing with pressure. If you get into stress, it then starts to wobble you and you go into your fight, flight, and freeze response. So whenever we talk about stresses, I always try to say, is it a keep you alive stress, or is it a stress of, oh my God, I've got loads and loads of emails, I've got a work deadline, and when you have those types of things, you can really start to fine tune dealing with pressure. So as I say, when I was lucky enough to be down with the SBS, they used to say, oh my God, how do you deal with playing in front of 80,000 people and that kind of stuff? And I said, whoa. If you make a mistake, you die. If I make a mistake, I just get abused by a few million people in the press. There's no difference in the stress. You've got way more. But that's when I started to realize, how do you take control? And obviously being very well read, but I did stumble across an amazing bit in Mandarin. In the Mandarin language, they use a sign that actually is, it means the same. The sign is the same for crisis as it is for opportunity. And that just reshaped my whole world around, actually, that is so true. It's just how you view it. And then, as you've all seen, we are fully in a crisis at the moment. People, and we're coming out the other side. Thank goodness I've got blue sky in front of me and I can see that the end is in sight. But the way you want to look at it is you need to have that forward vision. So when you are in crisis, what's the opportunity? So if I talk about personal stuff at the moment, when I've sort of was traveling probably every once a month to different bits, one of my drivers, one of my ultimate sort of things to do in life is to see the world. And I very quickly was hemmed in. I remember the first time that I realized I was not allowed to leave this little island of the UK. But then you have to change that mindset. How do I alter my mindset in order to take control of it? And you do it a lot when you're doing rugby, you do visualization. But I started to realize in the corporate world, how can you start to do that? So especially as a live example with this pandemic, I started to say, well, I've always wanted to be a good dad. That's another of my drivers. I've always wanted to sort of be around the family. I've always wanted to, be at home when they get back from school and all of the things. So all I had to do is shift my mindset from, oh my God, I can't travel, to, oh my goodness, I could be a good parent. I mean, I know it's gone on a bit now for 12 months and even my kids are bored of me. But that is one of the biggest things that I would really encourage, because I use an equation, and some of you can take this away, hopefully. And it was given to me by Sir Alex Ferguson, who for me is one of the greatest leaders. And I know he's in sport, and hopefully in a second, me and Paul will bounce the differences between sport and business. But Alex Ferguson had longevity, had teams performing for a long, long time. And he gave us an equation as an England team, which is P, performance, equals C, capability, times attitude squared. And so for him, yes, he needed players with capability. And he said, you only really ever have one sort of 10 out of 10 capability and 10 out of 10 attitude in your whole career as a manager. And his was Cristiano Ronaldo. He said, but the rest of the time, I took my team, built my team around 6, 7 out of 10 capability, but 10 out of 10 attitude. He also said, I did have one player in particular who was only 5 out of 10 capability, but he was 12 out of 10 attitude, and that was Gary Neville. And now I watch him play the old videos and I realize that he didn't have any capability. But the attitude becomes the most powerful piece. I mean, think about all the people that you employ in business at the moment, or think about all the people that you want to buy off and sell off. Do you sort of end up letting someone go, releasing them, firing them, moving them on because they have a poor capability? Or is it because they have a poor attitude? So often it's about the attitudinal piece. And that's the bit that I really want to get through, because we're going to be talking a lot more today around sort of the EQ. And you'll all know, as we're doing this now, if I was in the room in front of you, yes, you'd see I'm very small, but I could be moving around. And for me, trying to sort of slow everything down, to build those connections is really, really difficult. And you cannot start to build connections outwards until you've started to take care of yourself. And wellness is a big buzzword at the moment. I imagine lots of you are hearing more and more about it. And I've obviously, being a professional athlete, you're very lucky. And I'd sort of been on a few conferences and I'd wanted to learn more about what's this wellness. And I remember doing a course and going downstairs to my wife, and she said, "Oh, Lee, are you picking much up from this? Are you getting much out of it?" And I said, "No, I don't really understand it." And that's when she turned around to me, quite rightly, as my wife does. She's very good, and you know her, Paul. She was like, "Oh my God, of course you don't understand it." She said, "It's because you actually live it." And I said, what do you mean? And she said, "Well, you are, and she did use these exact words, the most selfish man in the world." And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "No, you're the most selfish man in the world about performance." She said, "Because your world was always, have I ate the right stuff? Have I slept enough? Have I done the right stretching? Have I lifted weights in the right way this week?" Everything in sport geared you to perform. And it wasn't until I got into the corporate world, and we've chatted about this a bit about this, Paul, is it? All of a sudden in the corporate world is I work and then I will try and fit the other stuff around. Or, I've had lots of sort of C-suite guys go, "Yeah, well, I can work off 5 hours of sleep and then still perform." And I'm like, whoa, okay, how do you do that? Because all the science I've got, and having had a few nights with a lack of sleep, you are not the sharpest the next day. And so that's where I really started to get into this. How do you take the athlete mentality into the corporate world, and it's corporate athletes. And I can imagine. Go on, Paul. You got a question?
No, I was just on the point of sort of selfishness, I suppose. One of the, I guess, inherent challenges of a lockdown, and I'm very mindful that we're an agency that works pan-European, and whilst we're quite fortunate in the UK to be seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, so some of our friends aren't. But one of the inevitabilities of this lockdown, I think, is everybody has started to internalize a little bit and perhaps be too sort of selfish. How is it that you can look after yourself and look after the team too? I mean, the high performing teams that you've played in, they've all been extremely talented and committed individuals, but collectively you've been brilliant. And I wonder, how do you look after yourself and then look after the wider team to make sure you get the best out of everyone?
Yeah. And that's a great question, especially if you're the leader. I mean, and if you take that equation I spoke about earlier, the performance equals capability and attitude squared. When you're a leader, you want your team to perform. You want them to have good attitude. They're at home with capability, and if they're not, you can train them. But how do you pick someone up with their attitude? How do you get the best out of people? And that's getting to know them. Because again, when I stumbled into the business world and I started talking, and one of the best CEOs I know, a guy from Diageo, actually said, "Lee, it's not a science business at the top level. It's an art. You are building things by people. Guess what? For people, relationships." And so when we have been segregated, when we have been sort of kept apart, like we have, it's even more vital that you understand what is your makeup. So if you are an introvert, and I've got lots of introverts that I work with now that are actually desperate to see people, because if you go round that wheel of life, what's important to you? So work, is it family, is it friends, is it travel, is it money, is it success in business, is it health? All of those bits, and it's a balance. It's constantly looking at those pieces. How do you get the best out of others is then to start to work on how, if I get the best out of you, I need to get to know you and say, right, what's going on in your whirlpool? Because the minute, and the best teams I've worked with, the minute you've got that connection, it's the minute you release that discretionary effort. And that's what you're looking for. The key bit is, how do I unlock that person so they give me discretionary effort?
I guess that sort of leads me a little bit to the sort of honesty part of this as well. I think big rugby boys, we don't talk about our feelings. We don't talk about being scared or nervous or anxious or any of that. We just kind of crack on, and I know that you've got a couple of mates who play for Bath and for England that have seriously struggled with anxiety and mental health over the years. And so I suppose, the question is, how do you be honest, and then how do you combat it and come out the other side?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a brilliant question, and this sort of goes back to something that I learned from the military when we used to steal bits from everywhere, whether it's high level sport, high level business, high level military. And when you first start in the military, they take the mick because you think it's really hard, and they strip you down, and then they rebuild you back. And like you said there, the perception of a rugby player is that it's rough and tough, but actually, if you imagine in terms of diversity, you have got super fast wingers with six-pack that, in my world, all they care about is their hair. They have got short, fat people like me that when I get tired, I drop the ball and my skill level disappears. Then we've got those super tall blokes that, I think the oxygen's different up there, and they think a completely different way. But for me, that whole diversity of people and personalities bringing together for a team, because you don't get to that sort of level without having some of those the ego, but you have to be selfless, you have to sacrifice, you have to give things, and you have to be honest. And there was stuff that I was rubbish at. So very early on in my career, I got very used to going, I don't want to be out there stood opposite that fast bloke because he will make me look really stupid. However, let me in here and I'll bash that one, and I'm in my element. And so I think it's part of the culture that you foster, where if you're a leader and you're honest about things, yeah, I'm under pressure at the moment. Yeah, I'm struggling, or yeah, I'm fine, but how are you? And I think that for me, that culture to create for people to be able to speak freely. And as I say, we'd have sessions where we were around campfires before big matches, or at start of seasons, and we'd sort of ask those questions. What will this mean to you and your family? Why do you do the things you do? Where have you come from? What's the dark secrets that I can protect for you? And because rugby goes that deep, and I don't think people realise. I think people see from the outside the smashing bit, but they don't realize the depth of the relationships in there. And that's why, they say that only 2 people ever die twice, and that is professional athletes and human beings, because, there's something about when you lose that sport, because you've actually very few people that I've managed to meet outside have ticked all the damn pink boxes of purpose, mastery, because you're getting better and better every day, and then the autonomy piece.
Fabulous. Lizzie, thank you ever so much. Really appreciate that. If you've got any questions for Lee, either now or at the end, please do pop them into the Q&A box, and we will do our best to answer those for you. Lizzie, really appreciate that. Thank you. Amazing insight into the transition for you as well, which I suspect wasn't quite as easy as people would anticipate.
No, again, and that's part of that sort of sitting in your comfort zone, pushing yourself, and I've always loved getting better and better, and trying stuff, and that's the beauty of sport. You get to try and fail. I do find in business people worry a bit more around catastrophic failure, but that's the way you learn.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think certainly at the moment there's. As you talked about, every crisis is an opportunity. I think perhaps in some cases right now, the perceived risk is greater than the perceived opportunity, and therefore doing nothing is an option. And as you and I both know, if you stand there, hold the ball long enough and do nothing, you're going to get smashed. So, not that I ever got smashed, of course. So Kate Russell has spent most of her career in healthcare, both in the front line as a healthcare practitioner, as well as corporate strategic roles in large pharmaceutical companies. She's currently a consultant to the UK National Health Service, as well as several pharma companies, delivering practical EQ training to the C-suite and the employees. A massive Bath fan, coincidentally. I managed to convince her to do this session in return for a few pints with Mearsey at the Rec next season. Kate, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. And yes, greatly. I have to say that your session very much leads on to mine, because yours is about the holistic person. So I'm now going to take us more into a focus on you're taking that person into the workplace. So I was going to be looking at EQ and the situation we're in and what's going on in your brain and things to look out for while we're in this time of crisis. So I shall just start the slides up, see what that looks like. There we go. Okay. So strategy when under pressure is really what I wanted to share with you. And one of the things that's interesting about talking about this topic is when we're under pressure, we're actually getting through the day the best way we can. So it seems odd and counterintuitive to be talking about longer term vision and strategic choice and strategic thinking. You'll be thinking just getting to Friday, or even in some days, just getting to the end of the day is as much as you can actually cope with. But I want to share some insights with you. We make 35,000 decisions a day, and that's on average. And in order to cope with that, 95% of those are on autopilot because you just couldn't process that amount of information. So we are most of the time in what I call the unconscious autopilot phase. Or if you are looking at the way that professionals and technical people have talked about it, you'll see that there's some quotes there, but it's actually type 1 thinking, which is very fast. But what goes on when you're in that phase is your default to your actual type, your traits, can be very high. And this is where your unconscious bias sits. Now, interestingly, from the age of 2 to 19, you're forming a framework. And you're seeing and feeling and exploring ideas and emotions. And in all of that time, you start to build up a pattern and a framework against which you will then judge most other experiences you have in your life. And that's part of growing up. It's part of how we're wired as human beings. But if during that phase, you actually lay down some biases and preferences that you then never revisit, you could have a bias that could be standing in your way of your own success. So 5% of your decisions and your thinking is actually made with conscious effort. And this is slow type 2 thinking. And it's very structured. And the best type of type 2 thinking is when you base it on a structure that you can then methodically work through your plan, and you can start understanding where you could be making assumptions that you haven't really tested. So what you're seeing on the side there is a brain, but there's actually 3 scales that it's looking at. One is, where is your focus? What do you notice most? And most of the work that's gone on in emotional intelligence and in psychiatry has identified that there are a type of behavior that is either rational based or emotive, intuitive, not emotional, more of an intuitive way of thinking and behaving. And then there's a way you make decisions. So you're either somebody who makes decisions in an evaluative fashion, or you're somebody who goes more with a gut reaction. Now, when it comes to gut reactions, as Lee alluded to, you get a stimulation, there's a focus, there's something that drags your attention, but it's actually in the gut that the chemicals are formed. And when those chemicals are formed, you've got roundabout in a conscious state 6 seconds to choose a path, to make a decision, and then drive to an outcome. And that's the period of time in the slow type 2 thinking you could be checking before you take your next step. But as I say, it can be very difficult when in times of crisis to switch from one to another, when all you're trying to do is get through the day. So fast thinking, type 1, and this is 95% of our thinking time, allows for quick decisions, quick action. It allows us to be very, very busy. And how many of us are busy these days, but doing what? And it actually gets the job done. And again, alluding to Lee and the armies and things like this, it also saves lives. This is where, when you form an activity in the army, you need to be able to do it without thinking. So when there's a stimulation or when there's a situation, you move to action, and your actions have been so well rehearsed, you don't even need to think about it. It happens for you. That would save a life. But the downside to this kind of thinking is it's a knee-jerk response. This is where your unconscious biases could start having a negative effect. And you have limited ideas because they will be within the major mind-up about it a few years ago, and you're still operating with the assumptions you had then. And it forms a functional fixedness. And this fixedness is what can, in the long term, lead to obsolescence in business, because you're not evaluating, checking, and refreshing. So slow thinking, which is the 5%, the deliberate choice 6 seconds, grows business. It brings new ideas. It future-proofs you, and it balances risk because you're not knee-jerking. However, it takes effort. It can cause you to doubt. That's often something where you think you know what you're doing and you're just cracking on. And if you start this, as some people accuse me of, navel gazing, if you're getting into strategy, at a time when there's time for action, it can be where you're going to have to put some effort in. And you really do have to find the balance between the two sides. But if you learn to harness both sides, you really can unlock the whole potential of what the brain can help you do. So this is why IQ will get the job done. This is where intelligence is only one element of it. And EQ will help you grow and succeed. So for example, and again, I keep alluding back to Lee's thing, this is about how you decide to think and feel about something. You can't control the fact that we've got a pandemic, but we can control what we actually want to feel about it and how we're going to act in the face of it. We have choices. And this is about, EQ is about having the ability to understand your emotion and your behavior, how that triggers you. What do you do when that emotion triggers you? And therefore, how do you then choose and what action are you going to take? How do you become more purposeful? The good news is you can develop and actually improve these techniques. So the first thing you need to ask yourself if you wanted to start on this journey is, how well do you know yourself? You have 6 seconds from producing chemicals from whatever stimulation. And what I mean by stimulation is sight, sound, smell, the telephone rings. How do you feel? It's been a long day. It's another interruption. How you feel starts off as a chemical reaction. And you've got 6 seconds in a mindful type 2 thinking to be able to choose how you're going to respond. So if you actually spend some time and use some of the EQ techniques, you can get to know more about yourself and really tune into your default behaviors. And the other interesting thing about making the effort to do that is 75% of all communication is non-verbal. And this is really going back to our primeval days and how animals, without language particularly, can assess threat and can understand whether or not what's going on around them puts them in a good place or whether they should be making plans to move on. Human beings have got all of those primeval and primate type capabilities. So what's happening for us is, if in your bias unconscious phase, you have an opinion about someone or a thing or a piece of work that you've got to do, your face and body will actually be telling your client, your colleague, your family what you really think way before your mouth starts. And one of the things about that is authenticity. This is how trust is built. Does your face, does your body language, do they all match up? Is what you're thinking, and don't forget, if you're unconscious in this, has your body given away what you really feel and what you really think about the situation? So understanding and getting some EQ skills on board and boosting some of those capabilities can actually really establish and build on your competence and how people feel about trusting you. So all very vague, all sounds, well, okay, where would we start? How would we look? So what I'm showing you here is from a particular tool. I mean, I'm talking about 6 seconds model here, but this is how it would look under the covers or under the bonnet. So what you have here is, on one side, you've got the 3 traits of somebody who is a rational thinker. They will be data mining, they will be modeling and prioritizing tasks. This is how they default to all the time. So when something new comes up, they will be asking, okay, what does that mean? Where have I got that information from? On the other side, you've got your intuitives. And that's where people will be thinking, oh, how does this feel? What's going on here? Oh, the mood's changed in the room. And they will tune in on a more emotional, not emotional as in out of control, but a more intuitive way of understanding what's happening around them. So a quick, simple example of how you can control this is, if you know, and that's where you've got to put a bit of work in, you've got to know which side of the equation you're on. If you are a logic, one of the key things in a type 2 is to say, right, okay, I am a data miner, but where am I going for my data? Am I defaulting to the same data sources? And how much have I done about homework and testing, whether or not that's still valid? But if you're intuitive, that wouldn't be your best afternoon. That wouldn't be something that would help you go to it. So if you want to start doing these kind of ways of thinking and working quickly. And intuitive, if you were to stop in that 6 seconds and say, okay, hang on a minute, who am I listening to? Am I in danger of being in an echo chamber here, validating my own ideas? Have I really thought outside of this? Really get into, where am I going to find new collaborators? If I need new ideas for the business, or I need to be able to be sure that I'm not in this crisis constantly staying within the sound bites that I have around me, how do I break out of that? And consciously doing something about that. So it isn't as difficult as it may sound. There are techniques for doing it. The art of it is to think to do it. So there are lots of business structures out there, and there's lots of ways of thinking. This particular one is one that comes through a lot of the pharma companies use, which is the OGSTM. And what they do is they look at the 4 S's, the 4 C's, and the 4 S's, but there's the 3 horizon model, there's a pestle model, there's lots of different business strategies that you can use to think about your organization and what you need to be doing. The art is to do it, because type 2 thinking is find a structure. So take a structure that you're familiar with, but the piece that you overlay it with is starting to think, okay, I am aware of my own biases and behaviors. So I'm now going to deliberately, when it comes to challenging some of these, I'm going to think about, what would an intuitive think of this? And deliberately think from some other perspective. Stand in the shoes and think of, what would that message sound like if I was to speak intuitively about this versus my default, which is to be very factual about it. And by learning how to move between the 2 languages, because they are very different, one person would be, I really feel very strongly about this. That wouldn't motivate necessarily a data-related person. So even just making sure that when you're building a plan and you're executing a plan, you've thought it through from both sides of the actual equation, that would get you further. And if you start thinking in terms of, how well do I know my own biases? That's really step 1 on this journey. So in summary, crisis can bring the best and the worst out in us, but there are benefits, because crisis is a disruptor. So if you are actually in a situation, you've got an opportunity, because the people and the unpredictable situations and circumstances mean you might explore strategies that you'd never have thought of before. Who knew that we were all going to end up on Zoom and MS Teams, and that we have this opportunity for communication? There's an opportunity for marketing that we haven't really ever explored before. We have a way to go, but pacing is important. But exercising optimism in all of this is absolutely the right thing to be doing. And no matter how sticky things are at the moment, the people who are going to be making the success of the future are those who are already thinking in terms of, what have I benefited from in this situation? What have I learned that I didn't know? Lee and his kids, I mean, that is such a precious time, and you'll never get that again. Who knew you could have a year of where you could really be changing the boundaries? You couldn't even take your children out of school to go on holiday without paying the excess prices. And now you've had a year with them, really having that precious time. So there are opportunities out there and horizons that wouldn't have happened without the crisis. Everyone is in a state of flux. This means that you've actually got an opportunity to offer new ideas and get people to consider a concept they might never have thought before, because for the first time ever, there's no norm anymore. So striking a balance between the now and the future, and really get to know yourself first. What are your defaults? Where have you really entrenched yourself? And how can you possibly look for different ways of achieving a fresh look at everything? And if there's one little word I want to leave you with, it's the word yet. Just try for yourself, thinking of sentences, and children are really good at this one, thinking of sentences that if you just added the word yet, it would take you back to what that doctor was saying at the beginning around, if you can't do this, it's just a case of you can't do it yet. I can't play golf yet. I haven't watched that program or read that book yet. I don't know how to do that yet. That yet reprograms the brain into all things are possible. It's just a time issue. It's not that I won't be able to. So they're the kind of things that I just wanted to share with you. So I'm just going to stop share now and come back to the main group. And if there's anything that people want to ask, or we can do it at a collective at the end, that's fine too.
Okay, fabulous, thank you. The more I hear you talk and the more we talk about this, the better it gets. And yet is just the most powerful thing. I haven't had a haircut yet. Mirzi, we've got a question for you. What exactly was your EQ response to this situation?
Now you're showing off my height. Yeah, that was quite an interesting one. That's I think I hit someone in a mall because they were on the wrong side. As you do, you deal with your own discipline. And I just remember him getting quite angry. But as he stood up, I was like, oh my goodness. But,
he kept standing up, and he kept going up.
kept going and going. So I thought, this is going to hurt. But obviously being like Scrappy Doo, I was thinking, here we go. Don't you push me. So yeah, I think I was being polite and saying, I won't do that again, but don't put your head there.
Okay, so that was an intelligent response rather than an emotive response. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Cleo, for sharing that. We've had some questions come in. One for Kate. Kate, do you think that these behavioural types might have changed since lockdown was introduced, and due to the impact of working from home? Have we all become more emotive and less data-led in the last year, do you think?
Okay, so interestingly, the traits that I'm talking about, and that little chart I showed with those data miners, and they're your traits, and they're actually before behaviour. So my answer is that's formed between the age of 2 and 19. So it's pretty ingrained. So what tends to happen in a crisis is you actually go more into your default, not less. And this is where challenging yourself on what are those traits means that you can be sure that you don't bury yourself in them. So it's not that you would necessarily, in a crisis, change your default position. If anything, you ingrain. But we all have what the technical term that they like throwing around in this is neuroplasticity. So think in terms of it's all elastic. What you can do is you can, by recognizing you've got that particular trait or behavior and you default to it, you can teach yourself and develop your ability to behave differently. So this is about traits, which is your default, that's your mechanism for working and your value set. And then behavior is what you choose to do about it. And that's the thing you can change. You can develop your behavior. So for example, I was very much a guardian type person in one role. And after 10 years of EQ, I have developed into another, but I still have a lot of the behaviors around the original profile I had. So you still have an opportunity to develop. And so I wouldn't say that we're necessarily really becoming engrossed and changed. What you may realize is you're actually seeing yourself as you are in this situation.
Yeah, I think I can speak certainly for myself. You know, I'm a ask for forgiveness guy, not an ask for permission guy, and data-led people generally drive me insane. But certainly the way in which I've sort of learned to try to embrace them and have a conversation with them has changed, and it's created some hopefully some more sort of positive relationships. A quick question for you before we move on to our industry expert for insurance. How do you go about ensuring that these relationships these positive relationships that you've created over years can continue in this current climate, and then when we get back to whatever we get back to?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic question. So thank you for asking that, whoever did out there, because again, I think some of the mistakes that I've seen businesses make is basically transform that whole, I work from 9 to 5 in an office, now I'm going to work from 9 to 5 on screen. And I think people that have done that, and then you will have seen more morph, put your hand up if you have, into, well, I don't have to commute for an hour now, so I might actually start at 7:30, and then actually I don't have to commute home, so I can finish at 7 at night. And I think the actual opportunity for being online is that you can get hold of 5, 6 people really quickly face to face, which normally in an office scenario you couldn't do. So I think there's a little bit around changing the way you operate, but actually saving this for learning and personal stuff. And I've actually had some of my best creative conversations saying to somebody, look, let's get out of your house, let's go for a walk, you're on the phone with an earpod in, I'm on the phone with an earpod in, and let's think. And of course, the minute you're outside with the sun or the rain or the wind, you start to think differently. So I think there's a lot more that we can do, if that answers the question, that embrace technology for the connections. They're not as warm, but you can do them faster, and then save work for different ways, not just hour-long meetings.
Paul, there's a question in there. I just want to answer that one quickly. There's a question around, should we start thinking of strategy and focusing on workers coming back and being able to get back into the office? And what does that mean? What I would say is the work I've been doing with the NHS, and we've been looking at really keeping them going. 2 tips. One is, yes, you definitely need to be looking at the strategy and build in a period of time where you acknowledge the scenario and the situation they're in. Do not gloss over it. Everybody will be in their own mental health and state, and they need to be able to work their way through it. So acknowledging the hurt or acknowledging the situation is a must, and then you can't let them wallow in it. So the next piece to that is, yes, we have been through, and this is the situation that we have. However, what have we now got? And that's that moment of future driving and really getting people ready to think in terms of, so what now? We could do anything. Let's look at what the positives are and get people to frame things in what's really bothered them in what's happened, but what can we now do that we won't want to lose because it's taken us a year to get these new ways of working? What's the good stuff that we take forward?
Fabulous, fabulous. That's done the introduction to Ian perfectly. Thanks, Kate. So we were really keen to bring an insurance supply chain perspective to all of this, and Ian Sutcliffe has spent his career in the insurance supply claim sector, with the last 15 years operating in senior leadership roles within the UK's 3 largest claims management businesses. Today, Ian works with clients right across the supply chain to create audacious opportunities. As an industry leader and a wellbeing advocate, Ian is best placed to offer his assessment of what we've heard today and how specifically it applies to you. Ian, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. I love you for referring to me as an expert. That's very kind of you. I've got 30 years experience. Hopefully that gives me some credibility. I'll just try to share my screen. So there we go. So yeah, as Paul has said, my name is Ian Sutcliffe of Valentis Advisory, and we help our clients create audacious opportunities, or as one of my favorite clients would call them, harebrained schemes. The main point about audacious opportunities is to step out of the norm, to stop pitching for the same old work in the same old way against the same old competitors. And for those of you that work in the insurance supply chain, I think you will probably, that will resonate with you a little bit. As Paul said, I've worked in the insurance sector for 30 years. Hopefully I can translate a little bit of what Lee and Kate have talked about into our market. We've heard words like wellness, art, collaboration. Hopefully you will hear those within my presentation. We'll start with the 3 elements I'm going to touch on. So the first is wellness. We'll touch on that a little bit, and I think we're going to touch on one of the questions about how should we be bringing people back. I have some quite strong views that we need to make a change to the way that we have been working, lose the bad bits and run with the good bits. The world has just changed. We need to take some of the learning and some of that type 2 thinking that Kate has talked about, and then creating audacious opportunities. So looking to different people, to different areas in our markets, and do things differently. Right, we do have a challenge there in that my slides won't move on, so I'm just going to stop sharing a second. I apologize for that. We tried that earlier. Bear with me, I apologize. It's always the way.
Lee's probably got some tips about how to cope with this if you want them.
How to cope with the stress of the slides, don't we?
Right, there we go. Pressure.
Hopefully everybody can see that. I apologize for that little glitch. So Lee talked about looking after yourself and looking after yourself before you look after others. And it struck me that as senior leaders, our well-being and being well is critical to the performance of our organizations. We need clarity of thought. We need the mental capacity to make good decisions. We need to be available for our colleagues, particularly those that are struggling. And we need to help them stay well, not just help them recover if they become unwell. A good friend of mine once described this as fitting your own oxygen mask before trying to help others. And I think that's really key. In my experience in the insurance sector, we're usually pretty good at helping people when they become unwell, but we haven't spent a lot of time or invested a lot of time in making sure our people stay well. And I know personally, many people have struggled in this lockdown. I have struggled in this lockdown more than the first one. The second one obviously wasn't quite so long. But fatigue has set in. Zoom is now tiresome and consumes our day. There's little downtime between calls and we don't have time to complete the actions. So some of the people I'm talking to have 7 or 8 Zoom or Teams calls a day. And as the country opens up, we've got to take the opportunity to think differently, begin to invest in helping our people stay well and helping them work in environments that are better for them and better for the business. So the world has just changed. Kate has talked about type 2 thinking, and in March last year, we had a surge. And for those of you working in the property insurance claims sector will know what a surge is, but we had a surge of type 2 thinking. We transformed our working landscape overnight, pretty much, with over 90% of people working from home within less than 2 weeks. This is something that our industry would have taken probably 10 years to achieve if we'd been left to do it ourselves. So the impact of the change last March was obviously COVID-19 arrived. Lockdown was imposed, something that none of us have ever seen in our lifetimes. We were unable to live and work as usual. And we saw downturn in our usual income streams. So claim volumes fell through the floor. So if you're in motor insurance, 70% reduction in motor claims because people weren't driving. I think there was probably a 45% reduction in household claims because people were at home and were able to prevent leaks or fires starting. And so our markets began to change, and we had to begin to think about how to recover our businesses. What that gave us, though, was opportunity, the need to think differently. There was a greater sense of community and support, so people were talking to each other in our sector about things they'd have never spoken to them about before. Competitors were working together on how to resolve challenging issues with their client base. We had this immediate move to online video calls. I think it's gone way too far, and I'll touch on that in a second, because we now have Zoom calls, Teams calls instead of face-to-face, and that's absolutely right. But we also have Zoom calls for every single conversation. It might only be once or twice a day I actually have a telephone call, and it's an appropriate method of communication still. Kate talked about collaboration. we've got the opportunity to collaborate in new ways. And so we need to take that opportunity. We need to take that activity that was so fierce this time last year and do something different with it in our businesses. So my challenge to you all is to find something to transform in your organization in 2021 without the change being forced upon you. So why would we go back to the old ways of working? This seems like total madness now, although I'm sure there are a few of us on this call that would love to stand outside the Lamb Tavern all afternoon. But actually working in that way, being in that environment all the time is not an ideal scenario. This is definitely total madness, and I've done this for years. And those of us that work in offices 5 days a week have experienced this for years and years. The daily commute does not need to be daily anymore. So we should grab and keep hold of the opportunity to work flexibly. Somebody asked a question about how, should we be thinking about how we bring our people back? And we should not bring our people back into offices 5 days a week, 52 days a year. Not everybody wants to work from home though, or can work from home. Not everybody wants to trek into the office in this kind of madness. But we miss the social interaction and the community benefits of the office. And knowledge transfer is a big loss. I mean, I was with a client, I had a meeting yesterday that we had to do. And we were talking about an opportunity, and somebody in the office pipes up, well, my brother-in-law is the director, the CEO of that business that we were talking about. And because we'd all been working remotely for so long, that knowledge loss would have impacted our ability to win that client. Now, this is definitely not acceptable. And I have to say that most insurance organizations are not like this, but it's an extreme example of what some people could be going back to. This is a realistic position. I have spoken to somebody sat on their bed doing a Zoom call, working in the last 6 months. And many of our young people either live at home or live in a house share and have only got one room that is private and that they can work from. And a lot of those people work in our customer contact centres, in our claims centres, and they don't have the facilities to work properly from home. And I suspect there are people in your organisation that just haven't said that, and that is how they are working. So as Kate said, we need to front this out, we need to have the conversations, and we need to understand whether our people are able to work as we are expecting them to. Now, we talked a little bit about Zoom and Teams, and it's been fantastic, and it was a massive shift. But to be honest with you, after a year of it, nobody wants 7 hours of Zoom anymore. And whilst there are huge benefits of blending online meetings with face-to-face meetings, nobody in insurance either should have to travel 2 hours each way to a face-to-face meeting that we now know can be done online. And as I mentioned earlier, equally, not all discussions need to be Zoom. We could pick up the telephone and talk to each other like we used to do on the way into the office or in between meetings in the office. But perhaps there's a combination that's more likely to be our future. So we have a responsibility as senior leaders to build a new working world for our people that incorporates everything that we've learned from the last 12 months. So the right balance of online versus face-to-face meetings, working from homes or local hubs where people don't have the facilities in their own home, reducing our office footprints and only using them where they add value or where we can bring people together in a much nicer environment. But one thing we have to do is equip our leaders, our managers with the skills to lead remote teams, because it is a very different skill set to managing people in an office where you have line of sight. So we have a great opportunity to lose the bad stuff and move forward with the good stuff for everybody's benefit. So we talked about audacious, or as one of my clients would call these, harebrained schemes. In my experience, the insurance supply chain has slowly been backed into the procurement corner. And as a consequence, we're invited to pitch for work through stifling tender processes. We pitch to the same people and against the same competitors every time. We cut our prices to win the work, and we win some and we lose some, but ultimately we stand still and the contracts go around in circles. So imagine a world where nobody needs to pitch for an RFP or respond to an RFP. Imagine a world where creativity is encouraged, and imagine a world where a fair price is paid for a great service. The type 2 thinking that Kate talked about and we acted upon last March will help us to create those audacious opportunities and slowly step away from those stifling bid processes. I know we've got a couple of insurers on the line, and I challenge you guys to drop your bid processes, to engage supplier partners in creative workshops and to pay them on value. You will save so much money on indemnity spend savings and you'll transform customer satisfaction. And I challenge those of you that are in the supply chain to engage with your clients 6 to 9 months before your contract expires, and encourage them to work collaboratively, to work creatively, and to be brave and create some audacious ideas. We all have to think differently. We have to change our routine, and we have to be consistent, but we have to follow through. Ultimately, we have to be brave in some of these circumstances. Now, Kate referred to the word art. I call it the art of hustle. But actually, it's a skill and it's a process and it requires commitment. The great thing about hustle is that hardly anybody does it. And so those that do are miles ahead. And the art of hustle really is around building and maintaining your network of people, your contacts. It's observing what others are doing in the market, how they're working, what opportunities there might be to work together. So engage with and leverage your network. Talk to the people in your businesses, in your group businesses, talk to your clients, talk to your suppliers, frankly, talk to your competitors, because there may be things you can do together. Be open to collaborating. And ultimately track and manage your opportunities and drive them through. So it does take commitment and it does take challenge, but you will win opportunities that wouldn't otherwise exist. Now, when we talk about networks, in the olden days, before LinkedIn, we had a stash of business cards. We had a Rolodex, we had an order book, but technology has made building and maintaining your network really, really easy, providing you put the time in to build, update, and manage the network. Your network isn't virtual, though, because it consists of people in your organizations, people that you work with, people that you know, and people that you've met. And the technology just makes it easier to keep in touch with them, to see what they're doing, to learn what opportunities might be there. LinkedIn is the business network of choice for B2B and the insurance market, but there are other platforms out there. So you need to work with what suits your business. In terms of who we should be connecting with, well, you go through your phone contacts, make sure you're connected with them. Connect with all your colleagues across the group. As you meet new people, as you talk to new people, connect with them. So I'll perhaps connect with some of you guys. You might not want to connect with me, and that's your choice. And equally, you might try and connect with me, and I may connect or I may not. You know, it's not rude. It doesn't mean there's an issue. It's our decisions. You'll see people who are linked to people posting on LinkedIn. You might see opportunity. Pick that opportunity out and connect with people. Follow companies on LinkedIn in your sector or in adjacent sectors. Connect with your group companies, the clients and their group companies, prospects and sector associations. And there's also interest groups and forums. If you connect with those people, you follow those people, and you are not using LinkedIn to just have a quick scan at the post, but actually are looking to spot opportunity, you will find a wide variety of things that are of use and of value to you. So hopefully my message about exploring opportunities with your network has come through loud and clear, and collaborating is a key part of that. Collaborating is simply working with others on a project or initiative. Collaborating with clients, collaborating with suppliers, prospects, even competitors, as I said earlier. But collaborating with sector associations and adjacent businesses. It's about taking small steps to work with other people who may be able to add value to your business and where you can add value to theirs with future returns. So collaboration, what does collaboration bring? What are the benefits of collaboration? Well, new opportunities is number one. You might also have the opportunity to leverage somebody else's skills for the benefit of your business. You can share resources. You spread the risk of an opportunity. You might be able to access new markets or solve problems. But you need to keep track of those opportunities. A sales pipeline tracker is a key way of doing this. Log every opportunity, put a value on every opportunity, adjust the value to reflect the progress in the sales cycle, and understand the next steps and due dates. And most importantly, challenge yourselves about this routinely, every week, every 2 weeks. Is that opportunity really worth £100,000? Are you really at the presentation stage? Challenge yourselves, but make sure you track them and you move forward with them. You'll see that I've blurred the names here to protect the innocent. Thank you very much.
Ian, thank you. Really, really insightful for the insurance supply chain, and I'm sure everybody will absolutely recognise some of those scenarios. We've just got time for a couple of quick questions. Very mindful of keeping this pithy. So, first question I want to address, and I guess this is for you, Ian. If insurers in the supply chain step away from the tender process, what measures do they use instead to ensure they're getting best value?
Well, we need to define value because, in my experience, value is a saving on a known fee from the previous year or a known cost from the previous year. We can't just rely on insurers to do this, but insurers will save, without doubt, 10 times more money by reducing the cycle time and reducing indemnity spend. Now, I've been working on this for years, and there is no silver bullet. We have to put forward propositions that can demonstrate those savings if we don't want our fees to be reduced. If they spend £1 million on fees last year and they can spend £950,000 on fees this year, they save £50,000. But I'm telling you, if they spend £1 million on your fees, they're spending 20, 30, 40 million pounds on indemnity spend. So, the savings are much greater. We have to get in rooms with them. We have to talk about this, and we have to find ways of measuring it, because it's in everybody's interest to minimize indemnity spend within the policy confinements. The customer is entitled to what they're entitled to. What we need to make sure is that they're paid, or the cost of repairs is the right amount.
Thank you. A question from Simon Hughes. I'll take this one if that's all right. What is the best sales CRM platform in your opinion? Mr. Sutcliffe will argue that the Valentis one is very good indeed. I would suggest to you that they are all much of a muchness. It's very much about the input and the intelligence that you place into it rather than the expectations of an output.
I agree, Paul. If I can just expand on that. The biggest issue is that people don't put the opportunities in and they don't update them. And if you don't do that, it doesn't matter which system you use.
Absolutely. Final question for all our panelists, if I may. It's a big question, but I guess we're going to have quite a short answer. How do we embed EQ and agility in a sector that is notoriously conservative and resistant to change?
For that very reason. We've been through a massive life change. Nobody here on this planet has not felt the impact of this change. And it is time for human beings to really do the effort of recognizing each other and the connection that we have, and basically making time to be more thoughtful. And EQ is just about thoughtful. It's about having that moment of pause and making the effort to connect with other human beings. So it couldn't be a better time to be doing it, in my opinion.
Fabulous, thank you.
I was going to say, I was going to second that and just say, in some ways, it's evolving. IQ was definitely the currency of complicated problems. You're now seeing in the world, because of the global stuff, because of the internet, it's complex, and complex problems require different relationships from different types of people, and this is where the EQ is going to be the new currency in business. So in some ways, it will be natural selection.
Yeah, Paul, I think it's about making time to think differently, and it's about putting processes in place to schedule time for you and your team to think differently. When we work with clients, we put in weekly or fortnightly calls for the whole team to challenge ourselves on opportunities that we found. And if you put that in, if you schedule that time, whether it's a full day or whether it's an hour every week, if you do it, then you'll begin to change the way that you work.
Thank you. Time for yourself, time for others seems to me to be the soundbite from this. Really appreciate that. Thank you everybody. So big thank you to all our speakers today. I sincerely hope you as the audience got something from this session. Just as a little added bonus, Mirzi and our friends at Teacup are offering everybody who's joined us today a free checkup. All you need to do is email lewis@teacup.co.uk, quote Realia, and they will enable you to get your free checkup. Thank you again to Lee, to Ian, to Kate. Really appreciate your time and your effort in putting this together. I suspect it's going to cost me quite a few pints aside at this one. And to all of you who participated and asked questions, thank you. To everyone who's joined us, thank you. And I sincerely hope we all stay well. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.